Okay, so we had a technical difficulty. I started this stream and it was using the wrong microphone. So here we are in a new, fresh version that should be using the correct microphone now. So we'll wait for people to migrate over to this new stream. And then we should be good to go. But we're talking about preposition in. Before, go ahead and share my screen again here so we're all caught up with the same thing. So before we talked about, this is from my book, The Logic of English Prepositions. This is part 3. Part 1, we talked about the first 3 groups. In is always a container, so we have containers of time, containers of space. Group 3 talks about the properties of the container, size, color, shape. Group 4, 5, and 6 we talked about in the last stream about prepositions. And this has to do with one action or situation being the process that contains the other one, in which case is a bit of a weird one, but it kind of fits in this group. Number 5 is just sort of a special belief or interest as a container. Miscellaneous group, we had just ones that I couldn't fit into a bigger group. Group 5 could probably also go in the miscellaneous group. So if you haven't seen those, you should probably go watch those first, because that gives you all the basic ideas and pieces and how the logic of a container, the key idea of a container, works with all the different uses of in. Phrasal verbs are a little more advanced. So if we're going to do phrasal verbs, we have to have the core. That's why I laid out the chapters where we go through all these different groups, and then we look at the phrasal verbs. If you jump right into the phrasal verbs, you're probably going to be confused. A lot of it will still make sense, but you're not going to have as a solid footing to handle the phrasal verbs. Sounds great. Now, good. Screen is black for me. Okay, let me stop sharing. Do you see me? Yeah, technology isn't behaving today. Rest in peace. Yeah. Okay, so I stopped sharing. You see the screen now, as in my screen or me? There might just be delay in the stream. We can see the screen. Interesting. I stopped sharing the screen, so you guys should see me now. There's no screen to see. Yeah, there's probably delay. There's probably lag. Okay, well, I'll start sharing the screen. I don't know. Technology. As long as you guys can see something, I guess that's the most important point. Okay, I started sharing it again, so it might take a second to switch over to that. But okay, I think we got all our people back. Now I can see your screen for like 5 seconds. Okay, I don't know, whatever. As long as it's not black. Just let me know if it goes black. So we can jump in here. How many phrasal verbs do we have? Okay, so the basic process, if you were doing this by yourself, if you're going through the book, look up each phrasal verb and try to understand how the logic of the word in applies. Remember, phrasal verb is basically a preposition put in action by a verb. Yeah. So in the introduction, I sort of described what I mean by phrasal verb, because there's a lot of resources online that list phrasal verbs that are not phrasal verbs. Like pretty much any time, from what I've seen online, a lot of resources, pretty much any time there's a preposition after a verb, they call it a phrasal verb. So if you say like, oh, think about, that's a phrasal verb. No, it's not. It's just about is there's other prepositions that can be used, but about is just one of the default, common prepositions that get used with about. It's the natural linking word between think and what you're thinking about. Prepositions just connect things. Or decide on. That's not a phrasal verb. It's just on is the preposition that goes with decide. And there's a reason for that. It's because of the core essence, because of the feeling underneath. So when we talk about a phrasal verb, we have to understand that Sometimes the line is a little gray, and it doesn't necessarily matter at the end of the day because it doesn't get in the way of building the feeling and generating phrasal verbs. Um, but it's a useful concept most of the time to think about phrasal verbs in a specific way. And what that specific way is, the way I usually define it, is it creates a new meaning. So you have a verb and a preposition um, that will create a meaning that is not present in the verb or the preposition by themselves. All right. So when we say think about or decide on, those just go together. There's no special meaning there. It's just that's what we say. um, but if I say, I don't know, blow up. Okay, so blow is up is up. If you blow and up, how do those make sense? How do they go together? Of course, it creates actually has quite a few meanings, but it has a special meaning that it creates because now it's like a two-word, or it's like a two-word verb basically, where decide on is not a two-word verb. It's decide, and then on links the decision to the thing that you're deciding on. So if that's confusing, you can just ignore it. But usually that concept is useful way. But put another way, right? Basically, a preposition put into action by a verb. So um, that's another definition that you can think of. But either way, let's check the comments here. All good now. Good. Perfect. So someone broke into my house and stole my computer last night. Okay. So break in. Break in has a few different meanings, which we're actually going to see another one in the second case. But someone broke into my house and stole my computer. So the idea of break, and let me just actually just go through this because I tend to anticipate what I explained. We use the verb to break because someone who breaks in is not allowed to enter. Okay, so the basic idea of break, obviously, as you probably know, is like, say I have, like, I don't know, a cup, and then I drop it and it breaks. Okay, so now it's not one piece anymore. That's the very, very basic idea of break. So in this case, right, we're using break because someone who breaks in is not allowed to enter. So it's not like the door is broken or anything. You know, maybe they do break the lock in trying to get in, and then the lock is broken, but that's not necessarily the case. They just, somehow unlocked the door or got access to the house without necessarily breaking anything. But because they're not allowed to enter because it was locked, we still use this idea of break because there was a forced entry. Somebody forced their way in when they're not supposed to. So this is a more abstract use of break where physically nothing might not, I can't speak. Physically, there might not be anything broken, but it still applies. So there's usually a lock which can be broken, picked, etc., or someone can come in through a window, for example. It doesn't have to be a broken window. They can slide the window open. Okay. So you can think like there's a barrier, because if you want your house to be locked so no one can get in, it's like there's a barrier that you're trying to create. And if, whether through breaking or not breaking, if they get through that barrier in some way, then they still broke the barrier. They got in when they should not get in. So often there's some sort of breaking, blah, blah, blah. It happens, but you don't have to literally break it, as I was saying. It simply means you entered without permission, often with force. So this idea of force. Notice we saw before that if something hits you, say, on the shoulder, it doesn't sound very forceful. So maybe just bounced off, whatever. But if something hits you in the shoulder, someone punches you in the face, the reason we use in is because there's force. So it's sort of pushes in more into that surface. And so in is naturally used to create that sort of, it's not actually a container, but it's almost like, compared to a surface, it's almost creating sort of a temporary container through pushing. Okay. So this idea of force here is actually coming back when we say break in. It's a little bit different, but it's the same root, right? They're sort of forcing their way into the container that is the house, right? So you could break into someone's house, office, a cash register, right, which is also a container, obviously, or some other secure location. But notice that if you enter someone's room without permission, for example, you can only use break in to, the to is optional, if the door was locked. Okay. So for break in, it has to be secured, it has to be locked. Otherwise, you just go into a room or enter a room. Okay. It would be weird to say he broke into my room. That implies that you had the door locked. Okay. So even if, like, hey, don't come in, I don't give you permission, but there's no lock on it, they didn't break in. Maybe if you like put a chair up against the door in order to try to keep it closed and then they still force their way in, then maybe you could say break in because you're trying to secure it. But so there's a certain implied meaning with break in, that there has to be some sort of secureness that you then break by defeating that secureness or that security. Of course, in a sentence like this, your house, office, or whatever is the container. It's like there's a lock on a box container, and you break the lock or somehow get past the lock so you can open the box and access what's inside. So that should be fairly easy to understand. We can see the idea of a container working here. We can see how breaking, even if it's not physical, sort of applies. There's this idea of security, this idea of force, right? We're forcibly bypassing the security to get in some way. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward, I think. I don't know what you guys think, if you have any questions about that, but that should be pretty clear, I think. These shoes are new. I'm still breaking them in. Okay, so another use of break in. Sometimes for some of these chapters, these different prepositions, I included, two different uses of the same type of phrasal verb that has different meanings, because I wanted to show that, there's variety, and we can see how just because there's multiple meanings doesn't mean that, they can't be logical or whatever, because it's being applied in two ways. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It can apply one way, it can apply another way. We see there's different groups above the surface. So it's the same with the phrasal verbs. We can get different meanings using the same verb and preposition combination based on the context. But prepositions are very, very flexible. So this is another meaning. In this case, you're wearing new shoes. The shoes might feel a little uncomfortable, right? Because they don't fit your foot. They may be the size for your foot to go into, but they're from the factory, right? They're very flat. They don't, you know, they're a little rigid. So they fit, but they aren't shaped exactly to your feet. Over time, your feet start to make a little indent or impression on the inside of the shoe, especially the bottom, and then they feel comfortable. At this point, the shoes are broken in because you broke the basic factory design shape of the container, right? The container is the shoe, a little. You didn't completely rip it open or break it, but you sort of shaped the inside a little bit more to your foot. You loosened it up a little bit. We don't break in clothes, right? Clothes are usually, they go around your body, but like, there's nothing to break in. It's a piece of fabric that just hangs on your body, right? But you can break in anything that you wear which has to fit the shape of your body. So this doesn't have to fit the shape of my body, right? It just hangs on my body. Or anything which is very new and stiff. For example, a baseball mitt or glove, or to use to catch baseballs, right? It's usually pretty stiff when you get it because it's usually made of leather. As you use it more and more, it gets creases and you can, move it around a bit more easily. Or the seat in a new car. So that's not clothing or something you put on your body, but brand new car, you sit in the car for a while, it's going to start to get a little bit of a shape, where you sit. So you break it in. Basically, the original shape of the container is being broken or adjusted to your use of that thing. Okay. So in the case of a new car seat, that's not necessarily a container. So that might seem kind of weird, but it still works. All of these still work because the idea of break in is this kind of would apply with like the properties of the container, right? The color, shape, or size. And when something is new, it has a particular shape, a particular rigidness to it, right? But as you wear it more, as you sit on it more, in the case of a new car seat, whatever it is, you are slightly shaping that container and loosening it up, making it less rigid by repeated use. Okay. So you're not actually breaking anything. It's a bit of a strong word to use here, but that's what we say. So you're molding the container, or in the case of a car seat, you can think of it as you're sort of creating a little indent. Maybe you're sort of shaping, because a seat, we sit in a seat, right? Even though we don't think of a seat as a container, it's not around us, but we sit in a seat. You can sit on a seat, if you want to think of it as a surface, but we usually don't do that. We usually sit in a seat, even if there's no arms, because it's sort of holding us. It's a weird use. um, but it's sort of like while we're sitting, it's like that's our space. We're sitting in this chair. I know that one's a little weird. That might be a stretch, but um, I know I explained that somewhere else. I don't know why I didn't have that in the basic examples. Um, but in a car, obviously you can sort of shape that seat, shape the container. You could look at it as you are creating a little bit of a container with your shape. It's another way to look at it. But um, that's break in. No comments, no questions. Good. I think we're all on the same page, hopefully. I'm at the hotel. Have you checked in yet? Checked in. So when you stay at a hotel, you have to check in, which means you go to the front desk. You can say, hey, I'm here. I need a room, whatever. Okay. So whether you have a reservation or not doesn't matter. If you do have a reservation, then it definitely you check in, because they're expecting you, and you just say, "Hey, I'm here." If you don't have a reservation, then it doesn't necessarily matter. You go through the same process. So it maybe feels a little different if you have a reservation or not, but it doesn't change the meaning. Either way, you get your room key and whatever else you might need. When you check in, you're temporarily putting yourself into a container, the hotel generally, or room specifically, that you can live in. The verb to check in this context is because you have to tell the hotel staff that you're there, and get the key. It's like your name is on a list and they put a check mark next to it because you're there. Okay. This one's a bit abstract. I tried to use that last part as sort of a way to sort of visualize and make it simpler, which does work. But when you check in, it's a very abstract use of check. But to check something normally, just check by itself means like you're seeing if something is there, you're seeing if something is working, you're looking at the status of something, basically. So I don't know if my roommate is here. Okay, I'm going to check. So I'm going to go look, see, is he here? Okay, he is, or he isn't, because I don't know. So I have to check. I have to investigate. Okay, that's the basic meaning of check, or one of the basic meanings of check. Then the in, obviously, as I said here, right? So the container is the hotel generally, because you're staying at a hotel. That's the building, or you can think of it as your room specifically, because you have a specific room. So you go to the front, and the check part is you're letting them know that you're there, right? So it's not necessarily investigating; it's a more abstract usage, but obviously they're not looking for you, especially if you don't have a reservation. But you go in and you say, "Hey, I'm here," right? And again, as I said, if you do have a reservation, it feels a little different. Like they are expecting you; they're not looking for you. But then, like your name is already on the list or in the computer, and so you're like, "Oh yeah, check, this person is here." But if you don't have a reservation, you just give them your information, and then they, okay, yes, check, he's here. So it's registering with the hotel so that you can get the room, all this stuff, blah 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 blah. So there's a connection between check and like, information. You check off a box on a list, things like that. Um, Check meaning, you can also think of it meaning to like verify something. So they verify your information, check your payment information, your name, all that stuff. So it's kind of an abstract word that has all these like little subtle different connections to other similar ideas. And then we apply that within so that you can actually get your stuff and get into the room and all that stuff. Then when you leave, you check out, right? So that would just be the opposite because you're leaving, you're exiting the container, you're taking all your stuff with you. So if you're checked into a hotel and then you go to the store, you're not checking out, right? So that's where the check part is important, because if I leave the building, if I leave the room, I'm not checked out. I'm just not in the container, because the check process doesn't have to happen again. But if I'm actually leaving, like, I'm not going to stay at the hotel anymore, right? I'm traveling somewhere else, going home, whatever it is. Then you have to go through that process of checking, or we could say maybe unchecking, to remove you from the list, to say, okay, this person isn't here anymore. And then the out is because you're leaving the container, you're getting off of the list, right? So we can see connection between off and out there under the surface. So that should be, again, it's abstract, but that should help clarify some of this, in that it's not just being there, but it's actually being registered that you are staying there, and then unregistering because you're not going to stay there anymore. See if we have any questions. Akif is here. Welcome. Okay. So apparently that's pretty clear because we don't have any questions. So that's good. Again, guys, if you have any questions in the process, just let me know. I'm trying to check the comments after every explanation so that if we do have questions about a specific thing, we can address that. Any questions that are maybe, a different phrasal verb or a different whatever, then we can we'll get to those later. You can still leave them if you want, but we'll get to them a little later. If we have time. I'm gonna run out of time. How many do I have here? I also have example idiom section, which we're probably not going to have time for, but there's only one idiom here, so we can throw that in. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if we include the idiom. We should be able to get through that. Okay, if we all chip in, we can buy it. Chip in, interesting. So chip, right? You might think potato chips. There's a reason they're called chips, because they're like little pieces of thinly sliced potatoes. A chip, if I, say if I break this, there might be a little piece that comes off. That's a chip. Okay. So chip is this idea of a little piece. You go to a casino, they give you these circle things. We call them chips. A little bit different in that case, but they represent, pieces of money. And so they're, you can throw in a different amount of chips. So chip is this idea of something small, usually a piece of something that broke off, but it has different applications. So to chip in means to put some money towards a purchase with other people. Okay. For example, you want to buy a really expensive gift for your husband's birthday, or husband. I said husband. Where did husband come from? For your friend's birthday. That was weird. But you can't afford it by yourself. So you ask some mutual friends. Mutual friends are friends that you and your friends both. You and your friend are both friends with. So you're all friends, right? Mutual. If they want to chip in so you can buy the gift. This is different than borrowing money. Okay. Very important. Different than borrowing money. When you borrow money, you have to pay the money back later, and the gift is from you. So if I say, hey, let me borrow this money so I can buy this thing for this person, and then I will give you the money back later. Okay. When people chip in, you all are paying for it, and the gift comes from everyone. Okay. We use the verb to chip because a chip is a very small piece of something. Let's say the gift costs $300. You chip in $100. So it's like you have so the total amount is the container, but there's another way to look at this too. Let's say you have like a hat or a bowl, some sort of thing, right? And so I take $100, I put it in the hat. We'll say it's a hat. Okay, so I put it in the hat, and another person chips in $25. So they take their $25, they put it in the hat, right? Another person, $50. They take their $50, put it in the hat. I don't know why the dollar sign is after the 50 there. Editing. I told you it needs to be edited. Until you have a total of $300. So the total amount is the container. So you can think of that total amount because it doesn't have to actually physically be in a container, right? So, okay, and I have all this money from different sources totaling $300. That's the container. holds $300 from different pieces, right? Different chips that add up to 300. But again, you can think of it like there's a hat, there's a bowl, there's something that you're actually putting the money into until you reach $300. But this idea of chip is because, well, I put in a piece, you put in a piece. It doesn't matter how big the piece is necessarily, but because we're all putting in different pieces to add to that total amount. It's like if I have a cup and then I say, okay, I'm going to give you this piece and you're going to give me that piece and I'm going to give you this piece, and then we're going to glue it together into one cup, right? Same idea. So chip is taking small pieces, in is putting it into one collective amount, and then now you have the full amount. So that should be pretty explanatory. It's a little bit of an abstract container, but it should make pretty good sense, I think. Chip in is definitely an interesting one. Yeah, it's simple. No, it is simple. Let's see. What about laugh it up? So up. Okay, I might come back to that one if we have time. We all chipped in to arrange this party. We all chipped in to arrange this party. Yes, but so chip in doesn't have to be financial. It could be effort. We all chipped in to arrange this party. It does sound, in this context, it does sound a bit to me like there was a certain amount of money that needed to be spent in order to arrange the party, and so it's probably financial based, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So there might be some subtleties in context that might make it feel more like it's financial versus not, but we usually use it with money, I think most commonly, and so that's probably going to be the default. But if the context is clear and like, let's say, I don't know, I'm working on a, what would be a good example? So let's say, so same context, right? But different level of clarity of what we would mean here. So let's say uh, I'm setting up a party, right? So there's a room and we're putting up decorations for the party and all this stuff. And then, my friend shows up and he's like, oh, hey, I'm here for the party. And it's like, oh, good. We're still setting up. You want to chip in? Right? You could use that. It's very clear. I'm not saying, hey, give me money because I'm setting things up. So you're chipping in your efforts to help us. Um, but even in that case, we'd probably say maybe like, do you want to jump in? You can maybe say that. Do you want to help out? Okay, help out would probably be the most common in that case. But chip in could be used there. It would be understandable. So I would tie chip into money because that's definitely the most common use. But there may be some flexibility in there depending if the context is very, very clear. Is it the same as chime in? Similar idea. But chime is like a little sound, ding, like a ding sound or something. We have wind chimes. You can hang outside and then the wind, makes them hit each other. And usually they're like metal or something. And they make these little, clanging sounds, like little bells. So that's a chime. When we say chime in, that just means like you're gonna say something, you're gonna add to what's being said. So maybe two, you maybe have like a group of people. It could just be two people, but usually that's more of a private conversation. But it could be two people, it could be more people. You're hanging out, maybe you're with these people. You're not necessarily outside of the group, but you're in the group, right? And then oh, this person says something, and this person says something, and then this person says something again, and maybe this person says something. So now this person kind of chimed in, right? They sort of added to it, and then maybe you also chime in, right? So the chime is related to the idea that you're making some noise, right, in the very basic sense, but obviously you're not just making noise. So we apply it in the sense of you're vocalizing, you're adding. It could even be a text conversation, right, where you're in a group conversation and then you want to chime in by adding this text, to what you think about what's being texted about, whatever it is. So it's based on the physical verbal one, but it doesn't have to actually be verbalized. But the in obviously is you're adding to the conversation. You're putting your words and thoughts into it and, interacting with that container, which is the group discussion, right? So it's an abstract container, but it's still a container. Everyone chipped in to win this game. Everyone chipped in to win this game. Yeah, so that one definitely sounds like effort. Everyone chipped in to win this game. Yeah, because you wouldn't. I mean, I guess you could pay to play. You all chip in money to if you're playing a video game. Yeah, we all spent some money so that we had the best equipment, and then we won the game. Could be, but yeah, this definitely sounds more like effort. Everyone chipped in to win this game. It sounds like everybody, did their part. They put in their little bit to all add up to the total effort that allowed us to win. That could work. That's not necessarily a problem. Okay, so we can move on. Sorry to drop in so late, but I have to talk to you. So drop in. This one's very interesting. Now notice drop and in. Okay. Dropping, you don't I mean, you could just drop and fall on the floor, right? But drop, there's some sort of downward thing. And what can happen if you're dropping, right? You can drop into something like a container, right? Drop it in the box. That would be very physical. Physical container, drop it into the box. Okay. So keep that in mind. So to drop in is another way to say to drop by. Yeah, they mean basically the same thing. Little subtle difference, little subtle different implication, but it's another way to say the same thing, which we'll see later. So yeah, by is more abstract. We're not going to necessarily worry about that right now. Like we saw before, to drop in means to visit, usually for a short time. I don't know where that was before. Maybe a different phrasal verb that I compared it to in a different chapter, but yeah, it means to visit. Okay, so you're visiting somebody. So like, oh, hey, are you home right now? Yeah, drop in. You'd say that. Drop in, drop by, stop in, stop by. You can use stop as well in this context. It means, go to that place, usually for a purpose. Maybe you're just going to hang out for a second. Maybe you drop in at the office where you work because you're just picking something up really quick. Maybe you forgot your computer at work, and so you're not actually going there to work. You're going there to pick up your computer. So it's temporary. You're stopping for a second. You're dropping in for a second, getting your computer and leaving. So it has that idea of visiting. It's a temporary stop for whatever reason. So you're coming into someone's house or where they work, blah, 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 not planning to stay very long. So this is an abstract meaning of the verb to drop. Okay. Think of it this way. You drop some money. You wouldn't leave it on the ground. Instead, you would immediately pick it up, which means it only stayed on the ground for a short time. Okay. It's one way to think about it. This is why we can use the verb to drop in the context of visiting someone for a short time, because you're in and out quickly. The length of your visit might last longer than you expect. For example, you might be there for 30 minutes, an hour, or more, but what matters is that you only planned to stay for a short time. Okay. So the actual result, right, when you say it, you plan to drop by or drop in. But however the result is doesn't necessarily change what you originally meant. Because you said it before, you didn't say it after. But and then after, let's say you stay for 3 hours, you're like, oh, I just meant to drop in and it's been 3 hours. Okay, so you didn't actually drop in, you stayed for a while. So that in itself should be fairly clear. As I mentioned, you're right, you can drop into a container. So the house, the business, the wherever it is that you're temporarily stopping by, is the container. Now, let's say it's a more of an open space. Let's say it's the beach. Can you drop into the beach? That seems a little weird. You can drop by the beach, right? You can stop by the beach. Same thing. But if you try to drop in the beach or drop by the beach, I guess you could drop by the beach. That does kind of work in a way, but saying drop in the beach just sounds really weird to me. And that's probably because in right? By is a different meaning. So drop by might still sound okay, where drop in might not, because of how by works. But the beach is not a container, right? That's why a common mistake is English learners will say, I am in the beach. Well, if you're in the beach, that means you're buried inside the sand, right? Because the beach is a surface. It's a location that has a surface. You walk on the sand, you go in the water, sure, because you swim in the water, but you're at the beach as a location, and you can be physically on the surface of the beach. But if you're in the beach, not the water, the actual beach, it sounds like you're inside the sand. You're buried. Okay. So if you drop into the beach, it sounds like literally you're walking on the beach and then all of a sudden the ground opens up and you just fall into the beach. That's what that sounds like. um, so that tells us an important piece of information, right? Part of the reason why in is being used here and why it works to create this meaning is because there's some sort of container, a house, a building, hotel, a business. Okay. You wouldn't drop into a park. If anything, that sounds like you're falling from the sky and then you just drop into the park, right? You parachuted in. I'm going to drop in. Okay, literally. So it's weird. Okay, so this should reinforce the idea that there's some sort of core essence that helps us apply in one context where there is some sort of container, some sort of building, versus a context where there is no building, there is no container to drop into. You can't use drop in anymore because there's no container, right? Okay. Let's see what we got going on here. Thank you for dropping in. Glad to see you again. Yeah. Yeah. Now, again, the implication is that person, like, that person is going to come by. They're not going to stay very, unless I said come by, right? That's by, but they're not going to be staying long, right? So if you say thank you for dropping in, and maybe they did end up staying for 30 minutes or whatever, but maybe you're an employee at a store, right? You see this person all the time. They come in, they're looking for something, they buy their thing, and then as they're leaving, you say, "Oh, thanks for dropping in. See you again." That might be a case where you use that, but it still has this idea of sort of temporary in and out of the container, right? There's some languages that use in for beaches. Well, I know maybe from a Russian perspective, this might seem kind of weird. So I'm thinking like Spanish, because Spanish has en, which in English, most commonly, if you translate when n is used, it's not always in or on. Sometimes it's other ones, but most commonly it'll either be in or on. And so when a Spanish speaker, for example, is trying to speak English, they won't know which one to use because to them n is just n, right? But we have in and we have on. So it gets confusing. It depends a little bit on the native language, because they just have that one word for the two. So if your language just has one word where we would use to most commonly, then you have to kind of figure out which one we use in which context. Russian, because you do have an in and you do have an on, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to line up, but if you have a similar type of system working where you look at a beach like a more of a surface and then you can go inside the sand like we look at it, then that's probably going to match more to Russian because you actually have two words. That would be more of a literal translation on in, which is en in Spanish. It doesn't have the same meaning. Yeah. So those are challenges between languages. And this is part of why I made this process, because instead of just trying to memorize like, oh, okay, I have to say on the beach, not in the beach, blah, blah, blah. There's still some level of memorization, but this is more like exploring, applying logic, building the feeling for it. And then there's still a learning curve where you try something and it doesn't work, right? You get feedback on it and it helps you sort of adjust to figure out where the lines are. That's still part of the process, but it's not like trying to memorize a bunch of different dictionary definitions or blah, 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 and trying to like mentally store that information in your brain and then somehow slowly and painfully over time actually get used to using it. This allows you to build it from the inside out, and it makes it's seems like a roundabout way, but it's much more direct, it's much more efficient, and it tends to give you the right result more often instead of just relying on what you've memorized. There's not a lot of memorization in this. The biggest thing that you have to memorize is the core idea, right? And even that you don't necessarily have to memorize, but it helps to memorize it. And then all the rest is just explanations of how that core idea applies to many different cases and contexts. So it's a very, very different approach than what you would usually go through to try to learn this stuff. It's very opposite, you would even say. It's from the inside out instead of the outside in. Okay, for each question, please fill in the blanks. All right, fill in the blanks. This one is pretty easy, I think. So there are blank spaces, such as this, on some kind of form. It could be a test, healthcare document, for example, whatever. If there are blank spaces, whatever you write is going into the empty spaces because you are filling it in with information such as your name, email address, etc. The blank space is like a container, even though it's just a line, because it holds the relevant information. Okay, so just a simple line on a page, right? The line is printed or written on the platform, physical surface, or not platform, but physical surface of the page. But you are supposed to put whatever your specific information is right above that line, right? And then that line, right, it says name, blank line. Okay, so this creates a container that is supposed to hold your name, right? So it's labeled name. That's not necessarily part of the container. It's like you have a box and you have a label on it that says name, and then you put your name into that box, right? And that box would be the line. So it's not just a line. The line tells you where to write, but it's actually kind of surrounding that information, and then that corresponds to the label name, right? So it's a little abstract, but it shouldn't be too hard to see how that can be a container. So you are physically writing on the page, yes, but the purpose, again, purpose is important. The purpose of the blank spaces is to add that information, okay? So you are filling in your specific information corresponding to the label. So there's no reason to use on here. You wouldn't fill on your name. It doesn't, at least in English, we just don't say it that way. It sounds weird. Could work because there's a surface, but we don't say that. It sounds weird. So always think of the purpose, right? Think of the purpose. Blanks, yeah. Of course you would go there. Blank space, Taylor's version. She caved in. Okay, so that means that there was some sort of pressure. Notice pressure, force. Interesting. Okay, because we've seen this force idea a couple times within. Somebody is asking her something. Maybe she has a kid or something, right? And the kid is like, I want a toy. I want a toy. I want a toy. I want a toy. And she's like, no, we don't have money, or I'm not going to buy you a toy. You already have too many toys, whatever it is, blah, blah, blah. And then the kid's just like, give me a toy, give me a toy. I want a toy. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. Keeps bothering, keeps pressure, force. I want the toy. I want the toy. I want the toy. And so you can think of it like, right, she has this mental container, this emotional container, whatever it is, and eventually she doesn't know what to do to make the kid shut up, right? Whatever it is, could be a friend, could be whoever it is, it could be a boss, different context. But the idea is you have this sort of container around you, you have the things that you're willing to do or not do, and then there's some sort of pressure that eventually you're just like, this is the only way I can solve it. I don't want to hold this up anymore. I'm tired of resisting. So I'm just going to let it happen. I'm going to give the kid the toy or do what my boss asks or whatever it is. So literally your container, your barrier, your boundary that you set up to say no, you let that go. And so it sort of caved in, right? So we say she caved in, she gave in. You can also use give. I mean, basically the same thing. Cave sounds a little stronger, but a cave obviously is like a cave, right? Like in the side of a hill or a mountain. And then so what happens? Well, if the cave caves in, what it means is it, at least part of it, maybe not the whole thing, but the walls of the cave, the ceiling of the cave collapsed and filled in the cave, right? So the cave was a container, it was a space. and then cave in, it gets filled in by the rocks. So it's an abstract application of that, where you have your boundary that you're trying to hold up, and then you cave in, you let it all come down, and you say, okay, fine, get the toy, fine, I'll do this, fine, whatever it is. So cave in, give up, different application with up, but it's the same, it results in the same meaning basically. That can have some other meanings as well, but um, that should make some sense. So this idea of force, pushing against the boundary, pushing against the container, that you eventually just let the container collapse. You let it cave in, right? So it's an abstract application of the literal cave in a cave. I'm sure Abdullah would have had something to say about that probably. Sorry guys, I'm a bit late today. Could you please fill me in? What did I miss? Yeah, very good. Fill me in. Okay, now that's a little bit different use of fill in. So you're not filling in blank spaces, but you are missing information. So on the form, there's certain information that they need, right? So that information is missing, and you have to fill in those spaces. In this case, if I fill you in, okay, so you are missing information, you're late, so you don't know what's happening. You don't have the information of, the last 5 minutes. And so, okay, now we're going to give you the information of what just happened in the last 5 minutes. So now you have that information. It fills you in, and as in there's a blank space because you don't know what happened. And then now it fills it in, right? So this idea of filling a container, okay? I was actually thinking about that. Abdullah was right. Maybe Abdullah was right. Were you saying this doesn't make sense? This isn't logical? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, any pushback you guys have, go ahead. Feel free to voice it. Like, that's fine. Pushback is always good. The tunnel caved in on us. Yet another use of in and on. Yeah, so, and that's important. It's not caved in on. This is what most researchers will say. They'll say it's a two-part phrase, or like a two-piece phrasal verb. It's not. There are 2 and sometimes even 3-piece phrasal verbs, where you have like 2 or 3 prepositions. This is not one of those. Okay, you have to figure out, and I talk about this in the introduction of the book. You have to figure out where to draw the line of meaning. Okay, it's not caved in on. Okay, it's caved in on us. Those are 2 pieces. Okay, so the tunnel caved in. That's what the tunnel did. You happened to be in the tunnel, and that obviously it may not necessarily land on you, especially if you say you survived, right? So it doesn't have to be directly on you, but it could be, around you, to where it either blocks your path forward or blocks your path backward. There's some sort of coming down, onto you, even if it's not actually directly on you. But it could be the tunnel caved in, period. The tunnel caved in on us. The tunnel caved in at 5. Okay, obviously it's not caved in at. That's caved in at 5. Okay. So the on and us just sort of tells us, again, not necessarily physically directly on top of you, but it sort of tells us what the cave in, I don't want to say landed on. That works, but it's too abstract. Where everything's settled to when it collapsed. Where did it settle? Right. So obviously it's going to settle on a surface. It's not just going to fall through space forever. And this idea of on has this idea of like rely on someone. Okay, surface or platform. I rely on them. I depend on them. I decide on something. It has this idea. He carries the weight of the world on his shoulders. He has a lot of worries that bear down on him. Okay, so similar to like how we have in with force, there can be this idea of on with some sort of weight on you, and this is sort of tied to that application of on. So that's, yeah, but it's not caved in on. Maybe Taylor's my personality. Maybe. Can I somehow use cave out if somehow using force to push out the rocks? No. So this is a good example of where you might try something and maybe it could work. You don't know. It seems to make sense, right? It could be logical, but again, there's the personality of the language. And really, we're getting to the essence. I do think they are logical, but just because something is objectively, generally logical doesn't mean the language is going to like it. Usually the logic will still work. It's still fine. It's just English doesn't say that. We use a different logical idea. We use a different expression. So there are lines under the surface. But if you try to use cave out, which I don't think cave out has any meaning, but if we keep the same context, the only thing that I could think that it would mean would be the opposite. So the opposite would be, okay, cave in, say the rocks collapse and fill the cave. Okay. Cave out would be it magically reversed itself. Like, that's the only way I could think that makes sense. If you use force to push the rocks out of the way, or push open the entrance, or whatever it is that you're trying to get past, we would use dig. So you're not actually digging in the ground, but you dig your way out, right? Because you have to forcibly move the earth that is in your way. So you dig yourself out of a hole, you dig yourself out of a cave. So we do use out because you're getting out of that container. But we wouldn't use cave because the cave isn't doing the thing, right? Or it's not some sort of boundary that you're trying to hold up that then gets caved in, right? It's you're trying to dig yourself out somehow. Everything actually makes sense, and I disagree with Abdullah. Oh, good. Idioms might not make sense. Idioms do make sense. They're definitely the most abstract, I think, but they do make sense. Okay, technically we're out of time, but I want to finish this because I don't want to keep doing in every single week. So we'll go a little bit longer. We'll try to not go so much on the questions, but as long as they're directly relevant, I will answer them for sure. Tom's sick today, so I'm filling in for him. Okay, filling in for him. So this is another fill in. So we saw fill in the blanks. We had a question about or an example that was given by you guys. Fill me in on the information. Tom's sick today, so I'm filling in for him. So this is another fill in. Okay, the phrasal verb to fill in has another meaning, which is to temporarily. Okay, notice we saw with drop in. There's this idea of temporary. Temporarily take someone's place. Okay. This usually happens at work when someone gets sick or has an emergency situation, but it could be for anything. If you're an actor in a play, for example, and you get sick, someone will have to fill in for you so that the show isn't canceled. When we use to fill in this way, the sick or absent person's role, job, etc., is the container, and someone else has to get into that container temporarily to perform the actions that are necessary. So this is abstract. This might seem weird, but I can tell you as an English speaker, it makes perfect sense. It feels just right. Right. Notice other languages, not languages, but other language within, other ways to say things. Okay. So in my role as a teacher, I help many English learners. In my role, notice that, in my role has nothing to do with fill in, but I naturally use in, right? So you are in a role. Now you can take on a role, take on why for reasons. There's a reason why that works and makes sense. That's related to on. You wouldn't take in a role because now it sounds like the role is coming into you. Okay, context is important. Context is important. I know it's not easy. This doesn't magically fix everything necessarily, but it overall, I think it gives a much better way to approach things. There's still going to be little cases like that are kind of confusing, that you're like, okay, why is on here and why is in there? So just because it's role doesn't mean you're going to use in. That's my point there. Depends on what you're saying, depends on how we're looking at things. It's very important. But in is naturally used with role. In my role as blah, blah, blah. Now, when we say job, you can say at my job to describe what you do while you are there. Okay, so that might be at. But you could say in my job as a teacher, blah, 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 just like role. You could say that. Depends on specifically what you're trying to describe. When I say at my job, it sounds like I'm talking about the place, the location where I work. So I'm using job, but I'm actually talking about my workplace. Of course, I work there. That's where my job is. So it's implied. But I'm using at, sounds like it's the location. Or if I say in my job as a teacher, now it sounds more like, again, that role. What do I do rather than the location? It doesn't matter. I'm not talking about the location. That's not important in that sentence. So the preposition that you use can imply extra information. Maybe I'm talking about the location and I happen to work there. And while I work there, this is what I do. But if I use in, then it just sounds like I'm talking about like in my role. And, while I am in the process of doing that job, this results. So now we have group 3, or not group 3, sorry, group 4. In the process of one action, another action happens. So that actually applies there. Okay, we see a connection to that group. That again is why we want to look at the basic meanings before we get to phrasal verbs and stuff. But so I'm mentioning that because fill in for someone, again, this might seem very abstract. How can you fill in? How is that a container? Well, we naturally use in with role and job and these types of things. We also say in my position, or in, like, what would you do in my situation? Okay, obviously a situation is something that's happening. It's a container. It's a similar type of thing. Okay. That would also be, I think, group 4. In which case, in which situation, in which context. Similar type of thing. Not exactly the same, but similar type of thing. What was I trying to think of for this? Oh, yeah. So instead, you guys probably know instead, but think about it. It's actually a combination of 2 words that became 1 word. Instead. Stead means place. Okay, so it actually used to be the more formal way to say it. We can still say it this way, but it sounds very formal or fancy. In his stead, in my stead. So I will do it in his stead, in his place. Okay, we have the word steady, meaning something is like if you're standing solidly on your feet. Okay, my place, my stance. Steady, it's solid, it's continuing easily. So it's an abstract application of that as an adjective, but stead. Okay. Instead, so when we say instead, I will do it instead of him. So he is in that position, he is in that place, he is in that role. Notice I'm saying in position, in place, in role. I'm not actually consciously doing that, I'm just speaking. Then I noticed I was using in. Okay, and then normally he does this, but he's not here. So I will do it instead. Or maybe he is there, but he doesn't want to do it. So I'm going to do it instead, in his stead, in his place. That's what instead means. Okay. So when you fill in for someone, you are doing something in that person's stead, in that person's place. Okay. And that position, that place is like a specific container. If you think of actors, okay, if I'm the lead actor, I can't just have some other character replace my character, right? Another person can play the same character. Okay, so then they step into that role. They step into those shoes. Okay, that's another way that we can express the idea of instead, or taking over the role or place of something. Again, stead, stance, in someone's shoes. Okay, fill in those shoes. So this idea of having a role, a job, a character, whatever it is, that is an abstract container. It might seem weird, but in English, it is an abstract container. Okay, and that's why we naturally use in with these things. Elber deleted something. That's okay. Like using some sort of magical force. I assume that's related to something else. Cave out, maybe, since I don't know. I lost the thread on that one. Not you deleting it. You mean filled her in. Replacement lol. Okay. I don't know what's going on in the comments. We're gonna move on. The cake looked so good that I couldn't resist. I gave in and ate a piece. Okay, so gave in, we saw cave in. But to give in can mean a similar type of thing. or the same thing potentially based on the context. So I gave in and ate a piece of cake. Now you could even say like I caved in and ate a piece of cake. Again, they can mean the same thing. But again, there it's not like a caving in, it's you have your boundary, right? So the cake looked so good, I couldn't resist. Hold up those walls, right? I don't want to give in. I don't want to let that cave in and eat the cake, right? You have to hold up that walls. You have to those walls. You have to resist. Okay, this idea of barrier. There's some sort of force pushing against you. The temptation of the cake. The cake looks good. Nope. Barrier. Got to stay away from the cake. Don't eat the cake. But it looks so good. I can't. Walls come down. Literally, that's a phrase we can use. My walls came down and I gave in. Okay, my walls came down. This is all related under the surface. Now we have a connection with down as well. Obviously, cave in, downward, that kind of implied, but my walls came down. I couldn't resist anymore. Okay, now walls came down could also mean that it could be more of an emotional thing, like maybe you're guarded romantically because you've been hurt in love before, and you have a barrier, and that tends to be used more in that context rather than this context. But it's a similar type of thing. There's some sort of emotional thing that you're trying to resist, but it's a little bit different case. Anyway, so gave in, cave in, to give in. So we have to talk specifically about give instead of cave. To give in is almost the same as to give up, but they're used in slightly different contexts. Give in is often short for give in to temptation. So it's actually a short version, give in to temptation. So temptation, it's like somebody's trying to lure you into a container, into a room, like, hey, come in this room. There's cake. We have cookies. Come to the dark side, right? They're trying to get you into that thing. So this is another way to look at it. Instead of you're trying to resist, you like something is luring you into that temptation, right? The box named temptation, the room named temptation. So they're trying to get you into that room. So different way to look at it. Still works. But give into temptation. We still have to look at give. Why give? That's the missing piece here. But you can also give into a person who is trying to get something from you. So same thing. Could be a cake that wants you to eat it in your mind. Could be a person that's not necessarily forcing you, but they're like, hey, buy me this toy. Hey, do this thing, do this thing, do this thing. Like, okay, fine, I'll do the thing. For example, your brother's begging you for money, but he's irresponsible and he won't pay you back. If you give him the money, you give in because you stopped resisting. You just said, fine, here's the money to what he wants instead of standing firm. Notice, instead of standing firm, stand. So we notice, maybe that's not directly related here, but we were talking about stead, stance, fill in. So if you're standing firm, you have a nice, good, solid barrier, and then it weakens, you give in, it caves in. Okay, you're not standing firm anymore. You lost your footing. Okay, that might be related under the surface. It's like a cave that collapses. Look, I wasn't even thinking about cave in, and I naturally used this exact phrase when trying to describe this. I wasn't thinking of cave in when I wrote this. So definitely connected under the surface. In the example sentence, we're talking about temptation, which is a container. All right, so I gave in and ate a piece. You can also look at yourself as the container because the temptation is inside of you, right? There's not necessarily one right way to look at it, right? This is just an explanation of how that core idea can possibly apply, how it can make sense. You're trying to lose weight, but the cake looks so delicious. You can hold on to your strength and not eat the cake. Notice that to hold is one of the opposites of to give. Interesting. Okay. So you can hold on to your strength. A phrasal verb we can use here, instead of hold on to your strength, you can say, I'm trying to hold out, right? Meaning last longer, resist longer. I can't hold out anymore. I got to eat the cake. It's just too much. I can't resist anymore, right? So hold out, give in. They're kind of opposites. Actually, they are opposites. Okay, interesting. Or you can let the strength go. Let the strength go and give yourself to the temptation. Take me, temptation, right? Okay. This phrasal verb is a very loud car. This phrasal verb is very abstract, and the connection to the logic is very weak. Okay, I actually, after talking about it today, I think it's actually a lot stronger. But when I was originally writing it, I realized that it was kind of a weak tie, sort of on the outskirts of the connection. So some people might say it's an exception. It could be, but I don't think so. If it is an exception, it's one of the very few that exist. I haven't found something that I would call an exception. But of course, many critics would probably say everything is an exception. Anyway, so with give, again, this idea of opposite of holding, you're giving and you're allowing, right? To give, to allow. They're not directly related. They're not synonyms, but they do have some sort of connection. If you allow something, you are giving permission, right? It's two ways to say the same thing. I allow it, I give permission. Because permission is something you have to give, but allow is just like the direct verb form of that, essentially. That implies the permission. So that's how give works, right? I'm trying to hold out, I'm trying to resist, I'm trying to hold up that barrier, trying to stay away from the temptation, right? Keep it outside of my container. I have these walls up, the cake is over there, no cake past these walls. And then if I give in, I allow the wall to collapse. I allow the temptation to take over, right? To consume me. Now I'm in that temptation. I'm surrounded by it. It's controlling me. Because I allowed it. I stopped resisting. I allowed it to happen. Okay. Maybe I didn't want to, but it was just so strong that I couldn't continue to resist. And so the result, just like the cave is just there. And if something happens to where it can't hold itself open anymore, right? Then what happens? It collapses. So it's a similar type of thing. So this should make pretty clear sense, I think. Even more than when I wrote it originally. Dig in. Dig in has many different meanings. You can literally dig into something, like dig into the ground, or if I have I can dig into my skin, but especially if I have like a sore or something, I can like dig into it. That's more than pick at. It's like literally like you're trying to pull off the top part. I know it's kind of gross, but that could be dig in. Dig in could mean to eat, right? So especially if somebody's very hungry. So it's very common, mom says dinner's ready, right? Kids come down and say, all right, guys, here it is, dig in, right? So because literally this idea of like, again, you don't necessarily want to eat, crazily with a lot of force. The parents probably don't want that, but under the surface, this idea of force, to dig, right? To shovel food into your mouth. That's something you can say, right? Especially if you're eating like crazy, right? Stop shoveling food into your mouth so fast. Okay. Shovel, dig. It's usually something used for the ground you can apply to food because you're scooping it up on a spoon or a fork. You're putting it into your mouth. You're digging into that food, right? You're eating it. So that's an abstract application of the literal dig into something. Doctor suggested me not to eat chocolates. However, I gave in after seeing my brother eating the chocolates. Perfect. Yep, exactly. So you saw him eating the chocolates. That gave you the temptation. You're like, cookies, or what is it? Chocolates, cookies, cakes, whatever it is. It's right there. He's eating it. I wish I could eat it. I have to eat it. Bam, you gave in. Okay. I don't know what that emoji is there for, but okay. My doctor suggested I not eat chocolate, etc. Good little correction there. Yeah. So instead of if you say doctors, that just kind of sounds like in general. Maybe if you saw multiple doctors, but we would still probably say my doctors because it's advice given to you. If you just say doctors, it sounds like general medical advice, like doctors recommend that you brush your teeth every day, or whatever. So that's a good little correction there. Person whose name is written in Cyrillic that I can't read. In Russian, it's fly on the food. I don't know how to translate it properly. So instead of dig in, fly on. I'm sure that makes sense in some way. It's Russian. And I say it's English. It's Russian. But within the context of Russian, I know this isn't just an English thing. The Spanish has logic of prepositions, essence of prepositions. Russian has the same thing. Japanese is the same thing with the Japanese particles. At some point in the future, I want to apply the same approach to other languages. But anyway, That's not the point. Okay, so we're definitely way over time. I want to try to get to this idiom really quick since we just have one, and then we're going to go. He looked me directly in the eye. In the eye. That's weird, right? Now, obviously, we're talking about physical, right? If something like, say, a bug flies into my eye, it sort of, actually the eyeball hits my eyeball. Okay. Or if he punched me in the eye, just like punched me in the face, punched me in the shoulder, this idea of force punching. Okay. So that works in that way, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about he looked me directly in the eye. The directly it makes it sound a little stronger, but it's not required. So he looked me in the eye. That's weird. How can I look forcefully? Right? That's weird. Okay. So this one seems very strange, but it's not difficult. We use this idiom in very serious situations. Okay. Usually. Because it has this weight, right? That's often why we usually add directly. When you look someone in the eye, it means that the focus of your vision and the focus of that person's vision meet. So here, right? I'm not looking over here and he's looking at me, right? So it's not the eyeball that matters. It's my vision directly locks onto his vision, directly eye to eye. Like you have camera and they're looking right at each other. It's the same thing. Okay. Now we also have a phrase, we don't see eye to eye. That has a different meaning, different idiom. That's with at and to see, or sorry, not at. We don't see eye to eye. I don't know, I was thinking at. Probably look at. So there's other idioms like this, but that they're kind of whether direct physically or abstractly related to this idea of this direct vision, this direct contact of vision. So in this case, he looked me in the eye. I'm looking at your eyes. You're looking at my eyes. Okay, not the eyes themselves, but actually, as I said, we're looking into each other's souls, you could say, but not just any point of the eye. We're both looking into the iris, the black part. Okay, so you can say, "Look at my eye." That's a different meaning. That can mean this part, that part, whatever different part. The preposition at is about a specific point or target, like we kind of talked about before. If I look at your eye, it's an object. Okay, so I'm treating the eye as an object. I'm looking at something. Look at the box. Look at the tree. I might be looking at the color of the eye, the white part, et cetera, et cetera. But if I look in your eye, it's like I'm looking at your soul. Okay. Now, physically, you could like say an eye doctor, right? They can actually like look into your eye physically, using light and whatever different technology and whatever. So that would actually be still as an object, but it's like into the physical container that is the eye as like an object. You're looking into the object. But that's not what this is. Obviously, you can't see inside my eye as a container, but I'm looking at your soul, right? Best way to phrase it, I think. We have a phrase in English, the eyes are the windows to the soul. There's a reason for that. What do you do with windows? You look into windows, right? Okay. So the eyes are the windows to the soul. Very natural expression tied directly to this idiom underneath the surface. So just like you look into or through a window in order to see what's happening inside, you look into my eyes, my solar essence, which means the inside of me rather than, so it's not the inside of my eye. It's sort of, you're looking inside me, right? As a person, as a being. It's like you're looking into my eyes. Okay. Yeah. Rather than outside of me, like the outside of my eye or my arm. So the eyes are like the opening of a container. Just like a box has a part that you can open in order to see what's inside. As a final note, we say eye, not eyes. He looked me directly in the eyes. Yeah. It would make sense to say eyes, but one eye or two eyes isn't the important part. Yeah. It's the meaning of the idiom as a whole that's important. We're talking about directly looking at who the person is, not their body parts. Okay. So again, it's not the surface, it's not the object that matters. It's the person in this context. In other words, it's not about the eyes, it's about the solar essence of that person. This is why we commonly add the word directly. Well, that might be part of the reason why. Sometimes I go back and I read stuff and I'm like, why did I say that? It made sense at the time. So that's still probably a bit abstract and weird. But you're looking into the person, right? So it's like the body is the container and the eye is the window that allows you to sort of look into that container to the essence of that person, the soul of the person, however, whatever it is. But when we use this phrase, so that's a way that I kind of tried to explain it. I know it's very abstract, but it does kind of work. We have this phrase here that's connected into the surface. But when we would actually use this, like, so we say, like, he looked me directly in the eye, and said, "I hate you." Okay, or something. So that's different than, like, say you're there, I'm here, right? And I look over and I'm like, man, I hate you. You know, maybe I'm joking, maybe I'm serious, whatever. But if I look you directly in the eye, now it has a more of a weight to it, right? Like, I'm looking you directly in the eye. I want you to understand. I want your soul to inscribe this message. I hate you, right? It feels heavier because I'm looking directly into your eye. So again, it does have this, there's this idea of a weight, which is usually applied to on, but again, weight, force is kind of like the force and weight are kind of similar ideas, right? Because a weight is a type of force. So, but weight tends to be used with on, force tends to be used with in, and there are reasons for that. But it's sort of a similar idea applied in two different ways with two different prepositions. So we do have that sort of heaviness, seriousness, right? If I don't look you directly in the eye, maybe it doesn't feel as strong. But if I do look you directly in the eye, it's like I'm trying to, more than just my words, I'm trying to communicate, make sure you understand, I hate you, right? Or whatever it is. It could be the opposite. It could be something else. But it again, it doesn't have to be serious. Usually it's serious. There's going to be some sort of weight or connection going on for sure. Like more than just random talking, but it could be like, could be a joke or something. Usually we probably wouldn't do it as a joke, but I can think of comedians who like would use it in a funny way. So like they're describing a situation, blah, blah, blah. And like, he looked me dead in the eye, directly in the eye, dead in the eye. That's another thing we could say, dead in the eye. He looked me dead in the eye and said, and then the punchline of the joke, you know, and everybody laughs. So that's sort of like playing with it a bit. But anyway, will you do or have or make a lesson on onto her? No, probably not. I mean, we can talk about it if you want at some point. I think I talked a little bit about that in the introduction section. I know I've talked about that somewhere, but when we do that, so a lot of the times it just collapses either for like just to in, or depending on the context, we might have to use just to. Usually it's just the first part, but details. Same thing with on. Sometimes it's clear and we don't have to use the full thing. Sometimes it's not clear and we would have to use the full thing. But the way that those work is you're combining the essence of two prepositions, just like within, right? That's with and in. Into, that's in and to. And on the surface, that's pretty easy, right? So in is the idea of a container, to is an endpoint, so put it into the box. Okay, so where is it going? To the inside of the box. So in implies inside, into, so I don't want you to put it on the box, I don't want you to put it next to the box, I want you to put it into that container, into the box. Put it onto the box. Okay, so again, on, and in those cases, it's very, very clear. We usually just say in or on. If I say put it in the box, I don't have to say the to because the destination is implied. Where is it going to go except the inside of the box? So in is sufficient in that case. If I say he jumped in the water versus he jumped into the water, that might be different. Okay, so if you have a lake, big body of water, you can just use in because it's implied that he's going to be surrounded by the water and swimming. Technically, it's into, but you can just reduce it to in. That's fine. However, you might have a body of water like a puddle, okay, in which case, if I say he jumped in the water, meaning the puddle, that sounds like he's already in the puddle and he's just jumping, right? Where if I say he jumped into the water, meaning the puddle, that sounds like he wasn't in the puddle and then he's going to that endpoint, landing on the water, jumping into the water, right? Because it sort of surrounds a little bit. So it's not here. This would be jumping in the water. This would be jumping into the water. Okay. So in that case, we might need to use one or the other. But a big lake, it's implied that you're going to be surrounded by the water, where a puddle is a little bit different because you can't jump in a lake, right? You're swimming. You can't swim and jump at the same time. Maybe if you can reach the bottom, then yeah, you could make that difference. But it's if you understand in and you understand to, or if you understand on and you understand to, a lot of those things just kind of fix themselves for the most part, and they just make sense. Dancing in your eyes. That's very poetic. That works, but it sounds very poetic. It doesn't sound like normal speech. Or maybe like the lights. So if the lights are sort of reflecting off the eyes and they're sort of shining and you can see them reflecting, then the lights are dancing in your eyes. Sounds a little less poetic because it works, but it still sounds kind of poetic. But that works. Now that's different than what we were talking about there with look in the eye. But I didn't know to look in the eye was an idiom. Yeah. Because here, right, it's an idiomatic expression because when I say he looked me directly in the eye, as all the things that I described, right, it has this special meaning underneath it. If I just say he looked at my eye, that's not an idiomatic phrase. That's just like I look at a tree, I look at an eye. Okay, different meaning. Do suggest, recommend that somebody do or not do something. Bare infinitive, no to. I guess that's referring back to the same thing before. Okay, whatever. I looked in her eyes and proposed to her. Yeah, so, and then that's also a reduction of into, just as an example of that. But I looked in her eyes and proposed to her. Yeah, so that's, I looked in her eyes. Yeah, that would kind of work with this too, because again, it has that connection, that sort of heaviness of the direct connection between two people. So that works. Yeah, that would be another example of the same idiom. So romantic, I know, right? There's a nuance involved between to look in somebody's eyes and to look somebody in the eye. Good point. Let's see. He looked me in the eye. I looked her in the eye. Hold on. To look in somebody's eyes. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Does that matter? I mean, there's still the same implication. Nuance involved between to look in somebody's eyes. Somebody in the eye. Yeah. That's a good point. Maybe if I thought about it more, I'd find a little bit more, but the only subtlety I can really find is if you look in someone's eyes, to me, that feels like maybe it's more romantic. Or if you say look somebody in the eye, it maybe sounds a little more serious. But that underlying idea of some sort of direct connection, like you're building that sort of like bridge between two people and like looking into each other's souls or whatever, that's still kind of working. And again, maybe there's other contexts or other examples that I'm not thinking of where maybe it's a little different, but I'm pretty sure that they would still share that. But again, context is important. So depending on exactly how you phrase it, yeah. Let's see if I try to replace that. If I say I looked in her eyes and proposed to her, I looked her in the eye and proposed to her. I looked her in the eye and proposed to her. Yeah, that feels a little off. It feels kind of too serious. Like, I mean, obviously, if you're proposing to somebody, it's serious, but like a negative serious. If I switch over here, he looked me in the eye, so he looked in my eye. So instead of me in the eye, he looked in my eye. Would that be it? Yeah, he looked in my eye and said, whatever. Yeah, that it doesn't carry that seriousness. It seems off in that case. So good point. Very good point. Mírame a los ojos, yeah. In Spanish, we don't even use in for that idiom. Yeah. Yeah, so and that's a good case because there's not always a one-to-one, right? So mírame a los ojos. A is generally translated as to, depends on the context, but most commonly translated as to. So literally like look, and then mírame is already in English, it would be like at me or to me or, some sort of thing there. But I guess we could say look me, just like we kind of do here. It works, but look me at the eyes instead of look me in the eye. And in English, that would have a completely different sense. Look me at the eyes, which that actually doesn't quite sound grammatical, but it sounds like, again, you're looking at the eye as an object. You're not looking at the person. So yeah. Anyway, okay, we're done. Yay, we finished. Like 45 minutes late. I really got to stop doing this, but I'm trying to cram all this into one thing. Next is 4. We're not necessarily doing these in order. I just wanted to do in because it was relatively easy, and I think it'd be a good example for you guys. So let me stop sharing here. So thank you guys for coming and watching and asking questions and interacting. Hopefully, yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming by. I wish I could say your name, but I just want to call you B because the first letter looks like the letter B. So I'm gonna just call you B. I don't know. But yeah, by teacher, yeah. Tomorrow, again, we'll be here tomorrow. We should be here tomorrow. Tomorrow's Sunday. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I won't have any interruptions. And I think it's either a 30-minute Q&A or a pronunciation lesson, one of the two. So yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. And send my audio, but it said this wrong email. I'll just put it here. Hopefully I don't get a flag or anything, but it's coming from me, so. So is this what you put? Because that should be the address. Anyway, try it again. If it still doesn't go through, then I don't know. I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't recommend that. I guess it depends on how much you value your privacy, but like I don't think that I don't want to have to like send you an email so that you send me an email, because if it's not going through to that email address, then there's some sort of issue with you sending it. So I don't know. Try it again. If it still doesn't go through, then maybe we'll figure something else out. You can maybe send it on italki or something if you create an account and just send it to me in the messages. It won't cost you anything. So we'll figure it out. Okay, see you guys tomorrow.